Okay, I think we should kick off. Welcome, everyone. I don't think there's anyone new here today, so I don't need to introduce Brenden again, but it's good to have you with us, Brenden. There's been very good feedback. Natalie, I don't know whether you want to say something about that.
There's been lots of good feedback, and I actually need to pass more of it along to you, Brenden.
Oh, thank you.
There really has been stacks of great feedback on this. Lots of people have said that it has been incredibly useful for them, and they've also enjoyed having the video afterwards to go back over things and really absorb it really well. So thanks, Brenden.
That's awesome. It's a pleasure.
Great. Can I just open in prayer? Father, I give you thanks for this new day. Thank you for the new opportunities of today. And Lord, just help us to listen carefully, give us wisdom as to how to implement what we learn. Pray for Brenden as he communicates, that he will communicate well and that we can receive it and implement it for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Brenden. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dave. Like I said at the beginning of the call, so good to see so many familiar faces and good to have you on the call. I'm just going to share my screen quickly and make sure that we have the right screen up. So the topic today is quite an interesting one, and I probably should have done a little bit more to brief it into people so that they understand exactly what adjacent revenue means. I'm obviously going to cover that in the presentation, but not too many people are aware of adjacent revenues and the understanding around why we need to find adjacent revenue. So we're going to chat a bit more about that in the call. Everyone on the call does know me. I'm at East Coast Radio. I've been there for many, many years now. And what I share is from my experience and our learnings. We operate in a very dynamic environment here in that we are stretched into different areas. But this is an area which is a commercial area. It does cross over into other departments within the radio station, but it is still a commercial area, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about. And also it is an initiative or a project that I manage for East Coast Radio. It has sat with me unofficially for a couple of years and then officially for the last few years in driving adjacent revenue. So we'll chat a bit more about that just now. All right, so first of all, there's always the requirement of Zoom, but I think everyone will know that we ask the questions to be held to the end. And I don't mind lots of questions, despite the gentleman's look on the screen where someone wants the meeting to end, but someone's asking lots of questions. I think we've all been in those situations before. Dave's laughing and nodding, and you just want the meeting to end, and someone keeps asking long questions. But I don't mind long questions. So if you are saving your questions to the end, I will answer every single one of them before we disappear. So thank you for writing those notes down. So this is the rollout for today. It's so that we can define what does it mean adjacent opportunities to drive revenue, or as I shorten it, adjacent revenues. And then some of the areas that you can secure adjacent revenues: partnerships, barter/trade exchange, cost control, and intellectual property. So we're going to chat more as we go through each of those. But adjacent revenue really is, especially in the times that we're living in, but besides the times that we're living in, because we're in radio, which is very much an audio medium and I'll say limited to a degree. I really don't mean it's limited. Radio is broad with what you can do from a revenue perspective, but because of COVID making an impact, because maybe your revenue is not where you would like it to be, and because radio is strong in certain areas but weak in other areas, we need to look at other doors, other opportunities, other revenue streams to make sure that our company is profitable. And throughout this, I always say this at the beginning of all of my talks, a lot of the information that I share is fairly basic. Some of the information that we share you will have put in practice or will have heard of, But I always hope throughout this that there's even just one nugget, because if we come up with one idea that works exceptionally well for you, this revenue could pay a bill for a certain thing. It could cover some of your staff cost. It could help you buy some equipment or some branding that will make your company better. So every stream counts, every amount counts. So that's where we're going to be looking at. The other thing is that old phrase of don't put all your eggs in one basket. The one thing that amplified this project for East Coast Radio is that our revenues around COVID were absolutely decimated to a level that I've never seen before. Obviously, we went through the 2008-2009 recession, which affected us, and we've had various economy shifts which have always affected us, but never to the level that this has. And so I would say 98% of our revenue is advertising revenue. Sometimes 2, 3, 4% is digital, but we're seeing that growing. And then these adjacent opportunities we're looking at currently to try and add other revenue streams so that we're not relying solely on radio advertising revenue to pay all the bills. So that's what we're going to be chatting about. So the definition of adjacent revenue is when you're looking for a revenue, it's really non-advertising spend. That really is adjacent revenue. We've covered new business ideas. We've covered prospecting ideas in previous training sessions. This is not that. This is about getting revenue from a source that you never had before. And that's what adjacent is. It sits alongside. So we'll chat about the definition later. But normally across the board in companies, where they look at building other revenue streams, they look at either new geographies, so new areas that they can focus on. They look at acquiring new customers. They look at adding new products or services to their range of offering. They look at new segments or sectors or focuses that they can get revenue from, or they look at containing a cost so that they become more profitable, because your gross income is here, your costs are here, and then that net profit is your revenue that you can operate on, your operating profit. But if you are able to shrink your costs through some of the ideas that I've got now, it gives you more operating cost. And so that's what we're going to be chatting about today. So I've got 2 case studies. This is between 2 sportswear brands, which you would have heard of. They're globally recognized brands, Reebok and Nike. And just as a way of comparison, because they've always been quite tight in their competitiveness, is that Reebok, in 1987, Nike's operating profits were $164 million, and Reebok's were almost double that at $309 million. So the value of the brand, Nike, was roughly half of the value of the brand of Reebok. But one of the things they decided to do was to refine their model and to look for adjacent revenues through either new geographies or new sectors. And more specifically, it was new sectors, new segments that they focused on. So if you look at 1987, that's 13, 14, 15 years later, Nike had grown its profits to 1.1 billion, while Reebok's had declined to 247 million. So what was the recipe for their success is that they took a decision from very early on to look for adjacent revenues in sectors that they hadn't focused on. And so they went very specifically for specific sports, whereas broadly, Reebok, for example, would have a general sporting range. And Nike went very specifically into basketball, tennis, and then golf. And their method or their way of specializing to secure this adjacent revenue was to target celebrities. And they tried to make it the premium celebrity in that sport at that time. So for basketball, it was Michael Jordan at the time. In tennis, it was John McEnroe. And then a little bit later on in golf, it was Tiger Woods. And they attached their brand to these guys. And that's the segments. So if we look at the previous definition, which is new geographies, new customers, new products or services, new segments, that was their focus for adjacent revenues, is that they specialized in those 3 sporting areas, which were basketball, tennis, and golf. And those were so successful, they then branched out into other areas, and that's what related to their success. So they found adjacent revenue in a few years' time that more than tripled their profit. So as a business, even if you're a successful business or you're a small business, how often do we take stock and look for other opportunities? And the answer is not very often. Often we do the same things. And there's that old saying that if you do the same things time after time and you expect a different result, it's not going to happen. So you have to be purposeful about looking for new geographies, new segments, etc. Now, as a radio station, it's difficult to look for new geographies. So we can kind of take that off. You've got your broadcast area. I'll put as a subtext to that, if you focus on your digital, so if you focus on your live stream, for example, and the access of that live stream anywhere else, it does open up some geographies, but will that be a huge money generator? Possibly not. So geographies is not where it's at. New customers, definitely. So and this is not an adjacent revenue, this is just business development, it's advertising revenue development. We're always looking for new customers. These two, the next three is where we as radio can definitely play in the space and try and secure new revenue. So new products or services. So we can definitely look at our current product set, our solutions that we offer to our clients, and say, we offer these options. How can we broaden that range? Because as soon as you broaden the range, you have clients that might not be interested in this segment, but you might add one or two products that would get their attention. But we'll get to that a bit later. And then new segments. Is there industry around you? Is there ideas where you can tap into specific sectors to try and generate adjacent revenue? And then cost containment, which all radio stations need to do. So that's where we stand with the overarching. The next example I want to give you is, so China is a communist country. In the time of the 80s, 70s and 80s, there was a very anti-communist sentiment coming from the United States of America. But in 1987, KFC was the first American fast food chain to launch in China, which was seen to be a massive potential market, obviously over 1 billion people that live in China. And so KFC was the first to adventure into this great unknown. And then they were followed 5 years later by McDonald's. Now, these are two of the biggest fast food brands globally, never mind just in America. So they knew that this was a potential new market. So if you go back to the definition of an adjacent revenue, it was new geographies. So they chose to move into China as a new geography and target new customers through that. The success of KFC is well documented. You can just Google it. There's videos and case studies. I did a course at GIBS, the Gordon Institute of Business Science, called Business Strategy. And one of the case studies we looked at was KFC versus McDonald's in China. And one of the reasons for KFC's success and McDonald's failure came down to the lack of having an adjacent revenue mindset, if I can call it that. So what KFC did is that they went into the country, and instead of being hard and fast about their solution that they were offering and the food that they were offering, they went into the market to understand it. They built relationship with local suppliers, so for their ingredients, for their chicken, etc. They understood the transport routes. They understood the market. They went into a lot of local restaurants and understood the cuisine. McDonald's, on the other hand, went in with a completely different strategy. It's the strategy that they apply around the world, where they say, this is the McDonald's way. All of their suppliers were based outside of the country, so their logistic costs were a lot higher and the timelines were a lot longer. So the freshness of the product was more of a challenge. Ultimately, when they started building relationships with local producers, so bakers and butchers or meat producers and produce producers, etc., they were not able to meet up to the specifications that McDonald's wanted. So McDonald's went in hard and fast. So the same menu that they had in New York, in ultimately Cape Town, in London, was the same menu they rolled out in China, where what KFC did is they adapted their menu. And so they tweaked it to have more of a local flavor. And the success is in the numbers. At the end of the day, a few years ago, they ran a total, and they said McDonald's had 2,500 stores in China, which is a lot. But KFC had 5,000 stores. And so almost double. And they had, I think, 11%. They are the largest fast food brand in China, bigger than anyone else. 11% of the market, which is a massive market. And McDonald's only had 6%. And it has been hugely profitable to them. So the lesson learned here is McDonald's is the mindset of, because we've always done it that way. And KFC is the mindset of, we need to adapt, we need to change to the current market conditions. And if we want to grow, we need to do new things. And that's the thinking that I want to leave with you, is that as a station, you need to make a decision. You can continue doing what you've always done, which is absolutely fine. And you can do it with excellence, which is great. But if you're looking to grow, if you're hitting a brick wall when it comes to revenue and you're looking for new revenue streams, you want to think with a fresh mindset and try new things. So we need to learn from KFC and that approach. Okay, so we're going to get into the practical definitions and understanding of what are adjacent revenues to create, adjacent opportunities to create revenue. Like I say, I will call it adjacent revenues so that I don't have to say that whole sentence every time. And as I've mentioned, it's non-ad revenue. And, you know, one of the things that we learned at East Coast Radio is the advertising rand, the money that's available to advertise, is a very defined pie. And lots of people are taking slices out of that pie. Other radio stations, magazines, outdoor billboards, street pole ads, bin adverts, all sorts of things are taking a bite out of that pie. The pie of the consumer rand is much, much bigger than the pie of the advertising revenue. So what that means is people are spending more on groceries, petrol, tires, education, etc., than they are on advertising in general. And so if we can get a slice, even though it might be a small slice, of the consumer rand, of their actual spend, what are they spending money on, that's an opportunity for us as a radio station. And we're actually quite well geared to do it. As you'll see, I'll get to that a bit later. So if you look at the definition of adjacent, it says next to or adjoining something else. So it's adjoining, next door to, etc. And I found this picture. So I love beautiful visuals. So I found this picture of a radio next to the laptop for adjacent. So that made me very happy. Small things like that make me smile. But the point that I'm making with the visual and the comment is to say that radio is our core. We must not and must never, ever, ever move away from our core. I think of a sales conference that we had, our whole group, and there's about 6 or 7 companies came together at Sun City, and we had a beautiful big sales conference, and our group CEO addressed us. And he spoke for about an hour about the future of media, which is interestingly where the future of radio and media, which is interestingly what I'm going to be chatting about in the session tomorrow. But obviously more updated information. But what he was saying is digital, 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 digital. And then he would stop and he would say, but don't stop selling radio. And then he would say, the future is digital and it's podcast and it's this and it's that. And he would stop. And about 6 or 7 times in this hour, he stopped and said, but don't stop selling radio, because radio is our core. That is our lifeblood. That's what gets us up in the morning. That's what we're passionate about. And we must never contradict the core. We must be adjacent to, we must add on to, so that it strengthens the core. So a lot of the ideas that I'm suggesting now are not out there ideas. You can still have out there ideas, but these are that work alongside radio really well. And those are the fuel almost that drive the ideas. So we're very fortunate in that we have a captive market that are our listeners, and we have influence. This is something that most advertisers, when they start a business, they don't have. And oftentimes it's one of the most expensive costs for a business owner is to market their product. We have that theoretically for free in that we have airtime, we have influence. So the ingredients for a successful business when it comes to marketing is price, product, place, and promotion. Those are the 4 Ps, the basics. It gets bigger than that. So we've got promotion. So we've got 25% of what's needed for a successful business. Now I'm talking about adjacent revenue business. So we need to think about price, we need to think about product, and we need to think about place. So is it accessible? Those are the other recipes for that success. But we have one of the largest recipes, which is influence. So any business in the world today, if you walk out of your door and you walk into a supermarket or into a bottle store, into an airtime vendor, or into a plumber, an electrician, a retail store, what are they doing but meeting a need? That's the essence of every single business, is to find a need that you can meet. So my suggestion to you when it comes to looking at other opportunities to add on to what you do is to really have conversations. Like as a radio station, we in the communication game, we should be interacting with people. I was chatting to Pagamani, well, at least on email, and he said his team is focused on clients and building relationships with their clients. And I was so happy, because that is the glue really that does hold business together. It's a person doing business with a person. So in those conversations, have broader conversations. So what are you doing? What's happening in your own life? Do you have children? Where do they go to school? Do you read them books? Do you just have lots of conversations with people? And that is just gathering information that you can help filter. There's a wonderful story of these 2 entrepreneurs that were sitting in a coffee shop and having a conversation. And the one entrepreneur challenged the other, and he said, I could come up with a business that will generate $1 million in profit in the first year. And the other guy said, absolutely impossible. And he said, no, there's a few elements that we need to do. So what he did is they left the coffee shop and they saw a group of ladies outside who were all dressed in their gym gear, and they had rolled up mats under their arms, and they were walking to an exercise studio. And so this guy, to prove his point, struck up a conversation with the ladies and chatted to them about where they were going, what they were doing while they were walking. And so what they shared is they were going to an exercise studio, and the studio didn't provide mats, and they had to provide their own mats. And so he started asking questions about the mats, and they said, oh, they're too thin, so our knees or elbows generally hurt. And they spoke about the smell that had a very chemical kind of a smell. So this guy then went in from there, and I'll make the long story short, and basically found a supplier to bring this in at an exceptionally low cost. Went back to that same gym where those ladies trained out, gave them all free samples, and it wasn't rocket science at all. His whole business started by having a conversation with someone and uncovering a need. So that's what we need to do. We need to look around our space. We need to speak to our people. So speak to clients, speak to staff, speak to people in your community, find out what they're doing. What are their pain points? What do they struggle with? What do they have to travel far to get? What are they spending their money on? Is it data? Is it that they love fresh baked goods? Are they looking at starting their own farm? What are the commonalities that you find out in your area? And through having those conversations, you'll uncover a need. And then when you have that need, then you bring it to your team and you thresh that out. And there's other elements that feed into it. And we'll get to those later from a practical consideration. But just to reiterate, your core radio. So radio advertising revenue comes first. Whatever idea you come up with, if it is going to hurt your advertising revenue, I don't think it's a good idea. Obviously, there's special circumstances, but in general, it's not a good idea. You have to protect your radio advertising revenue. You'll see there's some conversations around bartering or trade exchanges will come up a bit later, but we never, the rule at East Coast Radio is, unless it's absolutely essential to the business, we will not trade with a paying client if it's going to hurt the advertising spend. One of the things I said to Pagamani, I was chatting to him about strategy. And one of the things I mentioned is that at East Coast Radio, we've got pillars. We've got a pillar, which is the commercial pillar, so money, revenue. We've got the community pillar, which is the people and the listeners that we serve. And then we've got the content pillar, which is really the brand and the conversation on air, etc. We look at those pillars when we make any decisions. And if it's going to hurt the commercial pillar, it very, very, very seldom happens. So as a radio station, you're looking at growing revenue. You can't hurt revenue. So I think of a quote. There was a gentleman, I think his name was Mark Schultz. He was the vice president of growth for Facebook. So he was tasked with growing this already massive company. And his quote was, retention is the key factor in growth. And so if I can relate that to what we're saying here, is that your radio revenue, wherever it is the key factor for you to grow. It's the foundation for your business. So you don't want to mess with your foundation. Right, so the next thing that you can do from a practical point of view is have a skills and resources audit. It sounds very, very fancy, but it's actually to take a step back from your business, from the radio station, and think about what resources you have at your disposal. What skills do you have at your disposal? You might have a series of IT super professionals that are so good at what they do. You might have a phenomenal designer that is not utilizing his or her time as much as they could. You could have a big space. You could have a hall that is part of your building that you don't use. You could have products. You could have, there's so much that you have. And so to do a objective skills and resources audit, because that really is the weapons or the tools that you can use to look for adjacent revenue. So airtime is always a resource that you can use accurately. I don't know about you, but we try, almost like on a stock take basis, we try and keep a basic overview of our stock of our airtime. So we know we have 3 ad brackets at the beginning, the middle, and end of an hour of every hour. And those ad brackets have slots available for maybe 5 to 7 adverts. And we know how many go out on an average day. So we try and loosely estimate, well, it's not estimation, it's accurate, but we try and get a percentage. So we say we 10% sold or 30% sold or 50% sold, because our airtime is our product. And so we need to know the level of stock of airtime that we carry to know what we can do with, because what we call unsold inventory is our stock. And so like flights on a plane, seats on a plane, if you're sitting on an airplane and it takes off and the seat next to you is empty, the airline makes 0 rand on that seat. There's still a cost, there's still the fuel, there's all those wonderful things, but they make 0. If they sold it for 5 rand, they would make more money. So that is our view when it comes to unsold inventory. Obviously, we don't just give away airtime for no purpose. It's all part of a strategy and a plan. But if you're looking at securing adjacent revenues, you have a lot at your disposal in that you have airtime, unsold airtime, that you can use strategically. So we'll chat more about that later. There's obviously space, there's staff, etc. So there's lots of things that you can discover in your business if you look at it, that you are gifted and blessed with. So the next step is, once you have a skills and resources audit, then it's a good idea to gather together a team of creative people, a team of operational people, financial people, just different perspectives. Our brains are wired differently. God has blessed us with different ways of thinking. There's very detailed numbers people, and then there's very big picture thinking creative people, and there's very operational, practical, logical people. So to get a group of mixed personalities in the room and to look at the results of the skills and resource audit, to think about the areas around, the opportunities, etc. And there's more practical tips we'll chat about later. But it's good to meet on a regular basis to try and look at opportunities for adjacent revenue, other ideas, projects, initiative, events, etc. Anything that you can do using your resources to gain new revenue. But it's not something you can do yourself. It's a good idea to have multiple brains in the room so you can think quite broadly around your solutions. Okay, so the next thing relates to partnerships. Now, there's some areas that we do have skills in, but there's other areas that we don't have skills in. So we might need to, for revenue, we might need to partner with companies. And I'll give a basic example. I'm going to chat more about events later because it's an opportunity to make money. But you might not be very experienced at running events. You might not have the sound setup that you need to do a music event, for example. So you might need to look at partnering with a company. It could be an event organizer. In the case of an event, it could be another company that is running events. Whatever it is, my advice to you is pick your partners very, very carefully. You've got to work with reputable and experienced companies because at the end of the day, it's your brand. So if there is a superstar concert organizers and there is your radio station, arguably 99% of the time, your radio station is more well known than the event organizer is. So your brand is more at risk if something goes wrong. So that's why I say pick your partners carefully. So we have a policy at East Coast Radios. We partner with some events, obviously before COVID hit, and we will partner again once COVID is completely gone. But we're very cautious of event organizers because unfortunately our fingers have been burnt many times. So we never, ever, ever partner with an event where they are a first-time event organizer because you have to have a few events under your belt to understand the ins and outs of health and safety and sound and all sorts of other things that you need to understand. So we never, ever partner. It doesn't matter how good the event looks. We never partner with a first-time event organizer. In fact, we like them to have 3 or 4 or 5 events under their belt before we look at it. So there's that. Like I mentioned, your brand is at stake, and not only that, it could end up costing you money if there's hard costs involved, etc. So the last point that I want to say on pick your partners carefully is that I'm talking about where you go into business together, where there's a joint venture or where you share funds of some sort. And so to do this, you need to look at it as detailed as possible. And when I say detailed is that if you, let's say you partner with an event, like I mentioned as an example, you need to be in a place where there's full transparency that you can see exactly the number of ticket sales, the cost of the event, etc., etc. And there needs to be a reliable tracking method that will have transparency for both sides to see what's going on. Just as you would be transparent with what you bringing to the table from an airtime and exposure perspective, they need to be transparent with all of the costs. And my 100% recommendation is that everything is captured in writing and agreed to way in advance. So both parties are on the same page. There isn't unmet expectations or assumptions or anything like that. You agree, you put the document together and you sign and you move forward. That's why picking your partners is so crucial. All right, so we spoke about the consumer rand. We need to think about where is and when is money changing hands, and is there an opportunity, an adjacent revenue opportunity where we could somehow influence money being spent and somehow get a percentage of money being sent. Obviously, legitimately and ethically and all those wonderful things and above board. That's why contracts are essential. But you need to look around in your area. So in your broadcast area, to be specific, is saying what money is changing hands. What are people doing? What are they? Are they weekly shoppers? Are they monthly shoppers? Do they spend a lot of money? I know some of the areas are rural areas. So are they spending a lot of money on subsistence farming? So are they buying seed? Are they buying equipment, etc.? Is data, which is such a big thing. I remember I've been to Uganda many times on various mission trips, and we would go to the most remote little town somewhere, and there would be an MTN container and someone selling airtime, and every person on the side of a mountain in a rural area would have their phone and their airtime. So airtime changed hands, but it's that point is look around your area, look where is money changing hands. There's an opportunity for a business venture or an adjacent revenue where you could partner with a business or create your own business. So you need to look around. The other thing you need to look for is seasonality. So seasonality plays a big role in a lot of areas about where people and when people spend money. And if you look at probably about a month and 2 weeks away, or a month and a week away, is Black Friday. So Black Friday is notorious for having the largest amount of retail spend in the 52 weekends of the year in that weekend, which has been dubbed Black Friday weekend. So not all areas, fair enough, but certain times of the year when money does change hands. I know, again, in rural and agricultural area, there's livestock sales that happen. There's various community things that happen at different times, or there's markets that happen, or in the key areas like November or end of year, Christmas, Easter time, there's money changing hands. So in your skills audits and your thinking and your brainstorming, you have to apply the thinking of where's money changing hands, and is there an opportunity for us to develop a business model? So you think of your listeners, you think of what they like, what they don't like, your area, all of that plays into it. I love to relay the story. My first ever job was working in a gym, like a health club, selling membership contracts. And I remember our sales director was this big shot guy that came down from Johannesburg, and this is a small area in Pinetown. And he asked the sales team, like, what's happening with sales? The numbers are really low. And we said, you know what, it's tough out there. People don't have money. So he said, oh, really? Come with me. And so where we were on the first floor along the main road in Pinetown, and we went out onto the balcony, and across the road, this ties in nicely with my case study earlier, there was a KFC. And he said, what is that? And we said, that's the KFC. And he said, what is that inside KFC? And we said, there's people there. And he said, count the people. So we counted, and I can remember it was 15 or 20 or something like that. He said, if there's no money, then how come those people are all in a KFC buying whatever their meal is? He said, there's always money changing hands. You just need to help people make the right decision to spend some of that money with you, and you're offering health, and he upsold the whole gym side of things. But it's a story that's kind of always stuck with me. No matter how tough the economy is, no matter how many businesses have closed, no matter how much COVID has decimated certain things, money is still changing hands. The pie has shrunk, but people are still buying. You just need to visit a supermarket. Unfortunately, on payday, you just need to visit a bottle store. On payday, you just need to walk past an ATM and see the queues and queues of people. There are lots of people spending money all around us. So is there a business opportunity there that we can build a success and find adjacent revenues? All right. So we're going to chat a bit more about specifics now of where to look. So there's different levels of partnerships and what we call revenue shares. So a revenue share is where both parties bring something to the table, which would lead to a sale, and then you agree on a split of the revenue. So if you're looking for more substantial amounts of revenue, you need to remember that if the product or the item has got a small cost, then most of the time it's got a very small profit margin. So your return on investment of time or your return on effort is very, very small. So if you go into partnership with, and I'm just going to get a silly example, but Chappie's bubblegum, and you say to them, great, for every Chappie sold, I don't know how much a Chappie's bubblegum costs now. I always lose track. There used to be 1 cent in my days, but it's probably like 5 or 10 cents now. Dave's laughing at me. But let's say, for example, it's 10 cents for a Chappie. And you say to them, okay, we'll get 1 cent for every Chappie that we sell, and we'll put a whole lot of airtime and we'll promote it in our area, etc. I mean, you can sell thousands of Chappies. It's really not going to equate to very much because the profit margin is so low. So some of the examples I put up on the screen are the bigger ticket items that people purchase. Obviously, they purchase them less often. The smaller items, they purchase more often. But there's vehicles, there's, I know rural areas, so there's agricultural equipment, There's houses, people purchase houses or that sort of thing. The money is an investment where people might invest in a funeral plan, or they might invest in insurance or that kind of thing. So those where larger items take place. And there are companies out there, believe it or not, that might not want to put upfront money for advertising revenue. So you're not damaging any potential revenue, but they might say, well, if you deliver us leads and that lead buys a car or buys a tractor or a wheelbarrow or whatever, we'll give you a percentage of the commission that we would have paid to that person. If you work it out, the profitability of that could be quite worthwhile, because it's a higher ticket price, it's a higher profit margin. If you make sure you get a fair share on that, then you can do that. And then from a radio perspective, you would say, okay, cool. There's a dealership. They're not going to spend money with us, but they're going to give us a few thousand per car sold. Great. So we'll put a campaign together. We'll get our DJs talking about it. We can do something online and social media. To the listener, they don't know that there's a revenue share. It sounds like an advertiser. You do your absolute best to come up with great material. And theoretically, it doesn't cost you anything, or it shouldn't. You should try and avoid any hard costs. It's airtime and some of your time. And that could generate revenue. And generally what we do for a revenue share deal, we put it on for a trial period of time. So we might say, okay, you've got a sale coming up this weekend. We'll do a week of advertising for you. Let's find a way to track it so that we make sure that when you do make sales, it has come through us. And when we do that, then we share the revenue. And then they sell 5 cars and they say, hey, it was great. Here's your couple of thousand. We sold 5 cars. We're happy. And then they might look at doing something moving forward. And there's ways and means to do all of these things. And I think I'll give an example a little bit later on of how you can do an event like this, which meets a lot of objectives of yours. But it's got to be balanced. You can't give them hundreds of thousands of rands worth of airtime and you make 2,000 or 3,000 back. Obviously, it's got to be balanced. So you've got to manage that process. And you know, it's trial and error. It really is. You've got to try things out to see if they work on both sides. It's got to be mutually beneficial. So this is a picture I've used. I love this picture because there's so many people in this queue. Queues are one of my worst things to wait in. There's been times where I've sat in a queue. I think when I went to go renew my driver's license, I was in the queue from about 7:15 in the morning till about 2:30. And I know queues are commonplace in South Africa. It's one of the first things I would change if I was president. But I look at this queue here and there's probably a couple hundred people in this queue. Can you imagine if you were if they were buying a ticket for 200 Rand and you were getting 100 Rand of that money? And you played a part in getting these people into this queue because you told them about a particular event or a sale or whatever it is. And so the money is going to be changing hands. On the other side of the partnership, there's an advertiser that might not have money up front. They might only have money after the sale or after the event, etc. They would love to have advertising. So it becomes a complete win-win-win. It's a triple win in that the advertiser wins. He doesn't pay up front. He pays after the fact. The listener wins in that you help them get exposure to a particular sale or deal or event, etc. And then you will ultimately, because you get money out on the back end. So it really is a successful opportunity, and it's adjacent. It's not advertising revenue. It's the consumer rand that comes in straight into your bank account, really. So that's really great. Event organizers love these sorts of arrangements if you have events in your area, because generally they make most of their funds from ticket sales. So they love this. So if you have events, you just look at an event rollout, any event organizer that speaks to you, you try first and foremost to get advertising spend. And if they can't do the advertising spend, then you look at a partnership. So what a lot of event organizers do, they approach us all the time, as well as they say, partnership, we'll put your brand up there and we'll put your logo on the flyer. And we don't derive any value from that. It needs to be a commercial. We need to tick our commercial pillar. I say that so many times to people who come to us. And so you can use that line. It's no license or copyright fee on it. You can use that. But you say, as our business, we look after the community, we look after the content on air and our listeners, but we also need to look after the commercial aspect. If you don't have money up front, we're happy to enter into a revenue share deal with you. And you could actually put a structure in place where It's either a fixed percentage on their ticket sales or a fixed amount per ticket or something like that. Or you could do what we do, which is a sliding scale. So remember, we don't partner with first-time advertisers. We would say to them, how many tickets did you sell last year? And they say, oh, we sold 1,000 tickets. So, okay, from 0 to 1,000 tickets, we'll only take 10% of the ticket sales. From 1,000 tickets up, we'll take 20% of the ticket sales, because now we're helping you increase what you did last year. Most of the time, they're happy. I mean, the percentages vary with different people, but we like to create that tiered structure, so that if we put in extra airtime, extra effort, and we sell a lot of tickets, it's worth our while because we get some money back on that. But event partnerships can be very successful for us. The other thing that we've done in the past is we've on-sold what we call activations at the actual event. So if it is, let's say, a music event, you could, with permission of the organizer, obviously, you would go to your client. So you could say, let's say it's a music event, and one of the agricultural guys wants to put up a display because they know there's going to be 1,000 people there. So they want to put up a display. So you go to the agricultural guy and you say, okay, I will charge you whatever it is, 2 grand, 5 grand, whatever it is, to come and display and have an activation with your promoters and salespeople, and you can talk to potentially 1,000 possible customers. And then that money that comes in, you share with the organizer, because obviously that's it's their premises, but you secure the revenue. So again, there's another opportunity. So not only ticket sales, but you can on-sell activations. And so there's 2 new adjacent revenues that you can make more profitable as a radio station. And we've done it in the past. It works very, very well. All right. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. And depending where you go, it's called different things. It's barter or trade for trade exchange. And there's 2 levels to it. One is cost containment. So trading or bartering to cut your costs, to increase your profitability. That we're going to chat about next. This one here is trade for revenue. So to trade for revenue. So in simple terms, that would be if, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say there is a restaurant in your area and they are starting out, they're brand new and they don't have money set aside for marketing. So they come to you and say, hey, we'd love to advertise, but we don't have any money. Can you help us out? And you say, okay, great. You give us 20 vouchers at 200 Rand each. Okay, so 20 times 200, I think is 4,000 Rand. My maths is correct. So you give us 4,000 Rands worth of vouchers, and the amounts will obviously change per station, etc. But you have those vouchers in your possession now. Traditionally, what we would do as radio stations is we would give those away to our listener. Now, if you look at our pillars, you look at our commercial, our content, and our community, we're looking after the community. We're giving them some vouchers. We ticking the content side of things, and we can talk about it on air, and hopefully people will tune in, etc. But are we ticking the commercial box? No, we aren't. So what you could do is you could sell those vouchers with permission, obviously, of the restaurant. You say to them, listen, we're securing these vouchers, we're going to on-sell them. And so it's a 200 Rand voucher. You could say, hey, to all your listeners, there's a brand new restaurant opening. It's amazing. Our DJs have been, they've tasted the food. It's phenomenal. And because we're building a friendship with them, we're going to sell you a 200 Rand voucher for 100 Rand. So you'll get that voucher, you'll pay 100 Rand for it, and you'll go to the restaurant and you'll have a 200 Rand meal. How amazing is that? Half price. Now, these days when people are looking for value, that's a great option to have. And you can say it, you can frame it in the way of, we as the radio station are looking after you, our listener. And so we are making this available to you at half price, where you can go to this restaurant and enjoy a delicious meal with your family, and you can only pay half price for it. You still get 200 Rand, but you pay 100 bucks. Now we go back to our pillars. We look at commercial. Are we making some money from it? Yes, we are. Community, are we looking after our listeners? Are we giving them value? Are we being the hero for them? Yes, we are. Content, that's something to talk about. We're supporting local business. We encouraging people to support restaurants again. They've had a tough time after COVID. So you're ticking all of the content boxes. And again, what is this? It's adjacent revenue. So it's money that's coming in that would not have come in before. And you can apply this to various things. There could be a client that wants to give you I don't know, we got agricultural gale, a tractor to give away, although that's a big ticket item, so they might not do that. But let's say it's a lawn mower that they want to give away, or they've got some equipment that they want to give away, or they're happy to give to the station. You'll find that after COVID, there's a lot of companies out there that are sitting with a lot of stock that in a few months' time is not going to be worth anything to them. So they want to use that in a barter. So if you look at barters, barters date back to ancient times where people had a deal where it was like for like. It had to be mutually beneficial. I've got something for you, you've got something for me. So we've got this product that costs us money to broadcast. And those costs are there whether we sell out of airtime or whether we only sell 10%. So we've got to make use of that airtime cleverly. And some of it is advertising revenue, but the rest of it is through adjacent revenues like this. So that's just some of the ideas where you can practically use Trade Exchange to actually make money for the station. So it's payment in goods for services rendered instead of cash. That's what I see a Trade Exchange as use. And it's a product that you can sell. It could be a service that you sell. If you look at a product, you look at after COVID, there's a lot of places like accommodation. They've got rooms that just very much like our airtime. If Monday close of business happens and they've got a hotel or a B&B with rooms that were empty, they've had the similar to same costs, but no income. So you broker a deal. You say, okay, give me 5 weekend away vouchers. How much are they worth? They're worth 500 Rand. Okay, make it for 2 people. They're worth 1,000 Rand. Then you go to your listener, say, dear Mr. Listener, we love you. You are stressed. You need a holiday. We're going to give you a half price holiday. So $500 is all you pay for 1,000 Rand weekend. And you're making some money, making your listeners happy, offering a service to a place that's got stock available. And this applies to anything. So accommodation, restaurants, holidays, tickets for events. You can do the same thing for tickets for events. This is where you just got to think slightly differently. And that's where that adjacent comes in, adjacent revenue. And that's another method that you can use. So just on a practical level, I've mentioned before, it's got to be balanced. So your airtime, what you receive, the cash or the adjacent revenue that you receive, it's got to be balanced. It's got to be in line so that you're on top of everything and that it all makes sense. Keep track record of everything. It's got to be captured in a contract. You've got to make sure that you pay VAT. That's one of the requirements on trade exchanges. Even though you're paying, quote unquote, in airtime, there's still a VAT that's attracted to that. So there's still 15%. But and that's where you make sure your numbers all balance out, because you've got to cover that 15%, obviously, with your revenue that you get in. But my assumption is if you were to pay for that yourself, you would be paying 100%. So if you're only paying the VAT portion on that, if you have to pay VAT, then it's 15%. So, and we have to pay to Caesar what is Caesar's. So we have to pay our taxes where relevant. All right, so the next step is trade exchanges as it relates to cost control. So cost containment or cost control. I thought I'd put up these next 2 slides. So East Coast Radio have used this very, very, very strategically. So it's the same conversation, but this time we're not using it for revenue. We're using it to keep our costs down. So from a operational perspective, you'll see on the top left is our wonderful partners up the road in Pinetown called Alpine VW or Alpine Motors. And so they supply our vehicles, our branded vehicles. And we've got a year after year agreement that we renew and have done for probably close to 15 years now. We've stayed with the same dealership. They provide us with the branded vehicles that we use for our promotions and for our journalists, and even a car now for our management if they go to big meetings, etc. And so what we get is we get vehicles to use. They calculate the cost, almost the depreciation cost for that year while we have the vehicle. They put the branding on for us, so we even minimize that hard cost. The only thing that we pay is obviously petrol and insurance. on the vehicle, and we have to make sure we look after it, obviously. And in return, we do a calculation for exposure for them, and we upweight it. So it's a common thing in trade exchanges if they are in a place where they're attracting a hard cost or whatever. So let's say the percentage or the cost that they've estimated is X. So if it's 1,000 Rand for that sake, we might give them 2,000 Rand or 3,000 Rands worth of exposure to make it really worth their while. And like I say, it's worked exceptionally well for them. For the last at least 15 years, they've provided our vehicles, and the bright yellow van on the right-hand side is our, what we call our vibe van. That's our outside broadcast vehicle. That's also part of a trade exchange, which we renew. Obviously, don't change that every year. That we keep for many years at a time. But the value we allocate to that trade exchange, and the client is exceptionally happy. He used to do it with a lot of radio stations. He's cut down on the radio stations, but he's kept ours because we really, really look after him. We invite him to events, we invite him to the station, we make sure we look after him. He's a key partner for us. So the other area we focus on is we do travel. Our head office for our group is in Johannesburg, and we do have clients in Joburg and Cape Town, so we do fly. So we did a trade exchange with Mango to cover our costs of our flights. We did a trade exchange with Woodford Car Hire for all of our car hire around the country wherever we travel. And both of those, we make sure they are well looked after. And then on the smaller items, we have a targeted trade with a local spa where we send our clients and sometimes use that for incentives for our salespeople. We have a trade with Net Florist. So if we give gifts, if a client has a birthday, or if they get promoted, or if they're not feeling well, we'll send them a little goodie bag or goodie hamper from Net Florist, and that's also on a trade exchange. And then specific hotels, we also have trade exchanges. And again, we send our clients somewhere if we travel to an outside broadcast and we need to stay over, various other accommodation kind of costs. Those are things that we do that we would traditionally pay for, but now those come out of the budget. So instead of paying 100%, we just pay the VAT on them, which is 15%. And in so doing, it keeps our costs down as a company. And it's not for everyone. You have to manage it very carefully. I've been in another radio training session where this topic of trade exchanges came up, and how do we manage it and all that. I'm going to go back to my original point. Advertising revenue first. So Mango Airlines still spend money with us. Alpine VW, they do still spend, but very, very little. But we didn't do it to replace advertising. We generally trade with people who are not advertising with us. We have become quite good in our negotiations, and that some of these guys actually still spend with us, but we use the trade to boost their exposure. So like Net Florist example, they spend a certain amount with us every single month, but they get much more exposure than that because we add the trade exchange value on top of it. And we look after our trade clients as if they are spending clients. We really keep them close because we know they play an important role in our relationship with our clients. Right, last few slides and then we'll be done. As I've said before, it needs to make financial sense. If you're doing a trade exchange, you cannot hurt your advertising revenue. And like I say, just as a reminder to be ethical and above board, we have to pay our 15% VAT on all trade exchanges. Okay, so the last section we're going to chat about now is called intellectual protocol. It's a fancy term, and it really means an idea that we have come up with, or something that we own as a radio station. So we shorten it to IP. So the definition is a creation of the human intellect, which is just a fancy way of saying a thought that we had. And so you can create business within your business. That's the easy way of saying it. So it's something that you conceive of that you own. So if, for example, I'll give you an example from East Coast Radio side of things, is that we decided to create an events division. So I mentioned to you that we partner with events. So for many years, an organizer would come to us and they'd say, great, we'd love you to partner with our event. And we're in the music game, so they would have a great musician, and we would put some branding up, and we would talk about on air. So we'd give away lots of our airtime to promote it. They wouldn't spend a lot of money, or they wouldn't spend anything at all. And what was happening is we were looking at our pillars again. We're saying, okay, From a community perspective, our listeners enjoy this music, so it's ticking that box. From a content perspective, we get to interview the artist and we get some local music content on air. But from a commercial perspective, it's not really ticking that box for us. And so a decision was made quite a few years ago, in fact, to bring certain events in-house, to create our own events that we completely own and run ourselves. Now, obviously, we had to put resources and time and people in place to make that happen. It wasn't a short process that we just all of a sudden started doing events. We had to gear ourselves up. Our decision was also to make sure that we were the number 1 or number 2 event in that category. If we were going to do an event, we wanted to make sure it was good. One of the largest costs of events is obviously the marketing of the event. So we had that down pat. So that's where we created an eventing division, which prior to COVID was very profitable. We have between 6 and sometimes 8 events that happen throughout a year, and they are very profitable. We use them to generate ticket sales revenue, but we also then use it as a platform to make available for our advertisers so that they can activate their brand at the events, which also works quite well. So we do see that definitely as an adjacent revenue that we have added on. Also, we are in a very special time coming out of COVID. But I love this quote from Benjamin Franklin: out of adversity comes opportunity. And that really is the truth. If we look back in history, when there has been something terrible that's happened in history, out of that adversity, there are people with entrepreneurial mindsets that create opportunity. And so if I look at these brands that you see up on the screen now, these companies were all born around the 2008-2009 global recession that happened. And the majority, if not all of them, are from America, which was one of the hardest hit. That's where the bubble burst in America and their economy was affected to the tune of trillions. And yet, all of these extremely successful companies were born in that time. And so there's been a lot of studies, there's a lot of information online, but the one thing that holds these all together is sharing. That's the thing that was born out of this time. So that the global recession affected people's pockets. It put a lot of people out of work. It shrunk the income of a lot of families and individuals. So sharing became something very popular and very topical. Some of the social media, so Pinterest, Instagram, and WhatsApp to a degree, it was about sharing your life, sharing your communication. But Uber and Airbnb and Groupon was about sharing to keep the costs down. So Groupon was 20 people would buy a holiday, and because you were buying 20, you got it at a discounted price. Uber would be potentially you sharing, or a driver sharing his time with you to help you get to a place less expensive than other options. Airbnb was turn your extra room or your house even into accommodation. And people can share the time in that space so that they can have a holiday at an affordable price. So the sharing economy was born in that time. And what I'm really excited about is what's going to happen as we're coming out of COVID. I sometimes try, and we had a meeting here at the office the other day to try and think kind of broad and think what are the opportunities. But post-COVID, there are going to be opportunities. There's been a lockdown time where people have been at home, where there's been lots of time for introspection and thought. There's a new way of doing business and communicating, and that's exactly what we're doing now with the Zoom and online communications, online deliveries and ordering. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of people put out of work. So there's a lot of talented people that are in the job market, and maybe the job market's a little bit flooded. It's not the best time to leave a company or to even start. Not many people are hiring. So there are recipes that are floating out there. And mark my words, in the next few months, 3 to 6 months, you're going to see some amazing ideas come out that are going to turn into phenomenal businesses. And you're going to look back and think, oh my gosh, that is such a simple idea. Why didn't I think of that? Or I had that idea once before, but I didn't do anything with it. So we need to apply that as our radio station. Let's think about our listeners. Let's think of the state of mind they're in. Our clients, their businesses, what are they in? Do they have excess stock? Are they like hotels where they've got rooms that are just empty? Are they farmers that have got warehouses full of product that they need to move by a certain date? What are the opportunities for us as individuals and as radio stations to make the most of this? So how can we apply our minds to looking at those opportunities, which are adjacent revenue opportunities? So this is a picture from one of our events. It's become our biggest event. It started out with a couple hundred people, probably about 10 years ago, and has grown to 31,000 people, which is a major, it's our biggest event. It's bigger than the Comrades Marathon as far as the number of people that attend, which is phenomenal. And it's a signature event for us. It attracts revenue for us on multiple levels, in that we have a title sponsor and a sub-sponsor and activation partnerships and goodie bag insertions. And so we're looking all the time at other ways to generate revenue. Something we did, we started an online shop to try and take advantage of the consumer rand as well. And something we did is the brand Huawei had launched like a Fitbit or exercise monitoring type watch. And 2 years ago, we trialed that, in that we spoke about the big walk and health and fitness and getting in shape. And then we also mentioned this product that was available. And we ended up selling a large amount of these watches at the time. And that was another adjacent revenue that we sought. So again, remember seasonality and the consumer rand, but doing it at the right time, linked to radio, which is the core of what we do. So that's just an example of what we've done. The other thing that you can do, and a lot of brands do, and radio stations have got loyal fans that love us. Generally, they love our brand. So why not have your own product? You could go into a joint venture partnership with a company that produces these products. I mean, this is just a sample. You could do really anything. You've got to look at your market. What are people buying? So if you're in a market that is very sunny with little cover, and you often see people walking with umbrellas, why not? If umbrellas are something that are being purchased on a regular basis, get your brand name put onto an umbrella and make those available at a very reasonable price, where you're getting a small portion of the profit margin and you're ticking another box, and that your brand is getting exposure. So I love doing things that tick multiple boxes. So you're getting your brand out into the community, you're helping individuals to get shelter from the sun, and you're also making some revenue along the way. So it's a really simple but effective way. What you don't want to do is spread yourself too thin and go and buy or get into partnerships with 30 products, and then you investing money potentially, and then these items just sit. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. Don't get yourselves into trouble. I'm suggesting trial. And that's my biggest point. And the final tip as we close off is don't be afraid to try. Try one thing. Try not to let it cost you any money. Be strategic with partnerships that you do. Partner with good companies and good people that you know and trust, and try it. If it fails, then you've learned something, and you've learned, okay, cool, umbrellas did not work for us. We've got a crate load of umbrellas that we didn't sell. That's fine. At our next event, we'll give them out as gifts, or we'll say, if you buy an event ticket, we'll give you an umbrella for free, or whatever it is. There's always a silver lining to the cloud, but don't be afraid to try and fail, because when you get what works, then you can work with that. Advertising revenue comes first. I've mentioned it a few times. It's just a final reminder. Don't lose track of that. There's an old say, fish where the fish are biting. So that's where the money is changing hands in your community. Can you create an opportunity around that? Money is already changing hands. I always see it as a Christian business or as a Christian organization. If we are securing business that's ultimately going to bring money into the kingdom and into our business, what a more honorable and privileged thing that is to do. And then lastly is think of your area of influence. Think of your listeners, your geographical area. What do they do? What do they like? How can you be part of a value chain, which is a triple win? A win for you, a win for your partner, if you do partner with someone, and a win for your listener. And if you can create blessing and funding within that and tick your 3 pillars or however many pillars you decide to have, then you're in a good space. You're in a really good space. And that is it for adjacent opportunities that can generate new revenue. And now we're going to do what we usually do, which is open the floor and answer lots of questions. Hopefully everyone understood that and made sense of it. And if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, or come on with your microphone and I'll gladly chat to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenden. In my years of radio, I had some terrible adjacent opportunity experiences with Radio Maritzburg, disastrous, but we did some better ones with Kay and I. And I have got a question following up on that, but there is also there's one question here from GNCR, and let some of the others come in first.
Okay, I'm going to have a look at that. So first of all, GNC said, yep, KFC serves chicken feet in China. I know. Can you believe it? Who would have thought walkie-talkies would make their way to China? But they do eat all sorts of interesting things. I was very fortunate to go into China in 2006. I was part of a group that, believe it or not, smuggled Bibles into mainland China. That was an experience and a half. I'll share with some of you at some stage. It was amazing. But yes, so I saw they eat very interesting things in China. And yes, KFC did adapt their menu completely. Okay, so the next question also from GNCR. The question is, pick your partners carefully, is the quote. I mentioned that. So can you suggest any legal agreement templates for partnerships? Those who either sponsor a generator or tent for the event, or sponsor the banners, etc., in exchange for airtime. That transparency, how is their contract? So I'll have a look at our contract and see if it is something that I can share with you. But a contract really is, it can get lost in legal terminology, etc., as long as it's fairly logical and clear with as much detail as is needed. And that's an oversimplification, but our contracts always have the legal stipulation, which is who are we? So who are we as a legal entity? So our official name, our registration number, if you guys have one, your address, your contact details, and the main contact person, and then the person you're partnering with, exactly the same detail. If they don't have a registration number and they don't have exact details, and already that's a concern, that's a warning bell. You can be in the most rural area, you can be a tiny business, but if you're diligent in your organization and your ability, and you've got your registrations and all of that, that's a good sign that this company is mature and they know what they're doing. That's the kind of company you want to partner with. They might not have a BE certificate, for example, but they'll have an affidavit, or they would have a certificate of registration or something. So you capture that detail initially, that's first and foremost, and then a preamble in the beginning to say a radio station is entering into an agreement with said company to provide services in exchange for airtime as detailed below. Then what we do is we say radio station will provide A, B, C, D, E, F, G as detailed as possible, with timelines and equipment and value and exposure and etc. And then said company will provide A, B, C, D. Same thing, timelines, value, whatever details you can contain. And then at the end, you would do a summary of sorts, and that you would say, as specified, agreed, this is the totality of our agreement. Anything outside of this does not form part of the agreement or need to be agreed on in an addendum, mutually agreed on by both parties, etc. I've oversimplified a contract, but that's really what it needs to contain. If I can find a contract, I will send that through to Natalie. If we're allowed to send it out, I'll check, make sure that's ethical and all those good things, just as a guideline so you can see some of the relationships that we've done. So we have a partnership agreement, which is if we go into partnership with like an event organizer or a brand of some sort, and it's the same structure. This is who we are, this is who we are, this is what you do, this is what we do, this is the total agreement. And then for a trade exchange, we have a specific trade exchange document, very similar. Our documents, because we're part of a group and they're a little bit more corporate than radio likes to be, there's lots of definitions and terminologies and all the legal mumbo jumbo, which possibly necessary, but if it's quite clear in what the contract is, my thing is, all of your expectations need to be captured. That's unmet expectations create huge havoc. And unfortunately, the legal document is just the start. You've got to try and have a relationship with the company. And because there's unfortunately a lot of people out there that are either their morals are a lot more flexible than ours might be, or the ethics, or they just, yeah, not great people and looking to take advantage. So you have to be careful. To Dave's point earlier, lots of opportunities to be taken advantage of. And my thing is the contract helps what I call risk avoidance, in that you don't want all the risk placed on you as the station. So what I mean by that is if they say, okay, let's say it's a car dealership and they say, okay, we're not going to pay you any commission until you sell 10 cars. Until we sell 10 cars as a result of. I don't like contracts like that, because they are receiving a benefit and they're putting a high benchmark on it. And so they're receiving the benefit up. And so you sell 9 cars and you've invested thousands of rands with the airtime and effort and time, and they say, no, then that doesn't qualify. I don't like relationships. That's not mutually beneficial. And so you've got to say, my line whenever I'm negotiating with the client is, this has got to be good business. It's got to be good for you and it's got to be good for us. And so there might be points that we compromise on, but it's got to be balanced. So you don't want to sell 10 cars and then we get 500 rand. Like, that's not balanced for me. So that's where a contract would help. If I can send one through to you, I'll let you know. And you know what? It comes with experience. You, over the course of time, will develop a sense for what is fair. The more of these partnerships you do, you build an experience. Sometimes warning bells will go off and you need to trust your instincts when it comes to that sort of thing. But the more you do, the better you'll become, but be very picky in the beginning.
Yeah, my experience with that as well is, don't make it too complicated. Everyone has to be able to understand it.
Yes.
You know, if it's too full of legalese, then, you know, everyone is trying to jump around and it doesn't work.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? Maybe while others are thinking, one of my big, it was interesting, you mentioned the VAT issue. Most of our members are not VAT registered, okay. So VAT is not a problem.
Great.
But what was always a problem for me was this thing of commission, because the salesperson would always say, well, where's my commission in this? Particularly where there's no cash that's going through. But I think once you've got VAT, it may simplify that. But your take on that, Brenden?
Yeah, so it's a very, very, very valid question. So traditionally, unless there's a mature salesperson involved, we have a lady or one of the managers will negotiate a trade and do most of the work when it comes to a trade exchange. And we don't pay a commission on trade exchanges, purely because it's meant to serve a purpose. It's either making revenue for the station, which is funding the station and help it become more profitable. And so it will have a knock-on effect of being good for all of the staff, ultimately, if we keep costs down or if we're generating new revenue. If you have a salesperson that does manage it for you, and you can include some form of a commission. It probably won't be a full commission based on the full value that you would normally pay, because it's a very different business model, then that would be helpful. And sometimes if it is, I'm trying to think of an example. A simple example, like if we did a barter deal with a spa, not a SPAR, a SPA, for massage treatments, for gift and incentives, etc. We might give the salesperson that negotiated, if we ask them to do that, we might give them a voucher for them and their partner to go to the spa in lieu of a commission payment. So then it's still keeping our hard costs down as such. But for the most part, I'd say 90% of any trade exchanges that we do are negotiated by management only, not by salespeople. We might allocate a salesperson, like I say, a mature salesperson, to look after them as if they were a spending client. But it's got to be a mature salesperson who understands that they're not deriving a revenue, they're doing it for the good of the company. A very good question.
Yeah, that's very helpful, because it was always something that would cause conflict. That the salesperson had this great deal, but they wanted to make so much money out of it, and the problem was, where's the cash coming from?
Well, what's worse than that, Dave, is if the station makes a decision to approach a client to enter into a barter deal, and then the client stops the advertising because now they're getting some free exposure, and then they ask the salesperson to look after the account. A recipe for disaster. So that's why I say we prioritize. So I'll give an example of a brand, Hershey's. They're a well-known brand in South Africa, one of our key clients. And they've said to us, anytime you want to trade, we'll trade with you. But we don't trade with them unless it's a very, very small amount, because they take it, and we've seen it, they take it directly off the money that they spend with us. So we would rather have the money, and then we secure a trade from someone else.
Any other questions? Great. I think that wraps it up for today. And tomorrow is our last session. It's a bit sad.
Very sad, very sad.
But tomorrow we're looking at the future of radio. That's, I think, an exciting future.
Yes.
And we're looking forward to talking more about that and getting some great ideas tomorrow. So thank you very much, Brenden, and thank you for everyone who's participated today. Thank you. Bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Any questions, send them Natalie's way. Happy to help. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, especially the regulars that are on. Good to see you all. Cheers, guys. Have a good afternoon.